Hello and welcome to the 50th New Directors, New Films presented by Film at Lincoln Center and the Museum of Modern Art. My name is Tyler Wilson. I'm a programmer from FLC as well as one of the members of the festival's selection committee. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Theo Anthony to discuss his second feature, All Light Everywhere, our closing night film of this year's edition. But before we begin, I just want to again thank the members and patrons of both FLC and MoMA. This screening of New Directors, New Films was also supported by Film at Lincoln Center's New Wave membership program, American Airlines, and the New York Times. And film at MoMA is made possible by Chanel with additional support provided by the annual Film Fund. And I'd also like to extend a special thanks to All Light Everywhere's distributor, Super Ltd, for working with us on these screenings, both in person and online. So yeah, with all of that said, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce the director, writer, and editor of All Light Everywhere, Theo Anthony. Hey, Theo.
Hey, Tyler.
Hey, thanks for zooming with me.
Thanks for zooming with me.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
Where are you calling in from?
I'm calling from Hudson, New York, which is where I'm based these days. Yeah, I've been living here full time for a little over 2.5 years now, but obviously still a deep, deep connection to Baltimore.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'd like to maybe just start things off by thanking you for the film and sharing it with us for new directors. It's obviously it's a film that is sadly growing, increasingly relevant by the day, and it's strange doing this sort of pre-recorded discussion about a film like this because I wonder what the state of things will be once this Q&A is released. Yeah, I think we're all seeing a bit too many like Axon watermarks these days. But yeah, nonetheless, I think there's a lot to talk about now. I've seen the film a few times at this point, and each viewing leaves me with different questions. And I'm thinking maybe a lot of these questions are not necessarily questions that I should be asking you, if that makes sense. They're questions that are kind of thrown back to me, the role that I'm playing as a viewer watching this film. And I think your documentaries, this one especially, really have a rare way of engaging the audience, placing us so seamlessly into your thought process as a filmmaker. And, you have a way of making me feel very much a part of this film too. Like I really do share in your curiosity and, your clarity of thought throughout. For me, it's a pretty fundamental like aspect of your film, this feeling of not being talked to or talked at rather, but actually quite involved and like active, treated with respect, and yeah, invited to think seriously about what we're seeing, to say nothing of the fact that the end of the day I'm just still the viewer. But yeah, maybe first I'd like to hear more about this aspect of your style, your way of using the process of research within the film itself, the way you've constructed your film's shape to, at least to me, like almost resemble your train of thought and yet remain so, coherent and stimulating. This is a film that I think that has wound up to be like, philosophical, enlightening, but also so grounded and artistic.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess simply put, I'm just kind of curious how your mind works with each project. What system you follow to organize ideas and so on.
Yeah. Well, any one of those things I could talk to for a long time. But I mean, first off, just thank you so much for that really generous interpretation, and your programming team, this festival, and many other festivals at Lincoln Center have just been such incredible supporters of my work. So it just really means a lot to bring this film to you guys and to this audience. So this is just really a dream for us. Yeah, I think I really agree and appreciate with a lot of what you've said. I think really crucial to this is that I don't try to place myself as an expert. each one of these projects, whether it's Rat Film or Subject to Review or All That Everywhere, I didn't start out as an expert, and I actually knew very little about all of these different topics and areas. And I think what you're seeing in the film is me just really trying to tackle these ideas and to understand them. And I think that maybe speaks to how I treat my audiences. I think that no one likes to be talked at, and no one likes to kind of be spoken to as if you aren't capable of putting things together. I think actually the biggest thrill is like leaving all these different pieces and allowing you as an audience to put them together in some way. So we're always really trying to thread this line between leaving it open-ended, but while also giving just enough context. And yeah, I think it's a very, very fine line that we walk. You know, I think that there's like, if we went too much further, this would be, you know, an explainer video. And, you know, if we pulled back, I think it would be really inaccessible. And I think that we really want these ideas to be accessible, because I don't think that they have to, you know, when we talk about philosophical ideas, there's just this inherent distance that we feel as if they don't affect us in the here and now. And I think that the act of seeing and the different institutions and powers that and how they see and how they treat different forms of vision are really like fundamental at a material level to just our everyday experience. And, you know, we're obviously seeing that in the news right now play out. And so, yeah, we just felt like a real, like actually moral imperative to make a lot of the core ideas in this film communicable to the audience. So, so yeah.
Yeah. So maybe can you talk a little bit about, you know, the genesis of the project, you know, where or when this film really started for you?
Yeah, it's really hard. You know, with Rat Film, I had like such a like very particular, you know, seed moment of that rat in the trash can. And like this, all these films kind of feel like the same film at this point. So it's hard to tell where one thing ends, another begins. It kind of feels like all these different ways of, like all these different trails around the same mountain, you know? And yeah, I mean, I think this film just takes a lot of ideas that I've explored in previous projects. You know, for one, it takes place largely in Baltimore, which is where I, you know, was living for most of the production of this film, and obviously grew up and around, you know, in Baltimore. Yeah, and then looking at the structure of systems and how power kind of works its way through these systems, and what that lived experience of those power abuses, you know, can be. I think really if I were to have like a clean beginning of this film, it would be really in the aftermath of like the murder of Freddie Gray, which is so crazy. It's coming up on like 6 years ago. And just being in Baltimore then, and just like looking at the conversation on police reform that was happening, and just seeing that was really ground zero for testing this new wave of reimagining policing. This was still during Obama's, you know, presidency, and one of the big reforms was around body cameras, and everyone was pushing these body cameras in. And I just started to look more into the company. I didn't know anything about body cameras, and pretty quickly I just found out that this company Axon, which had just was in the process of rebranding from Taser, also made, you know, these weapons. And I thought that link between weapons and cameras was a really compelling one, that I just kind of followed this thread for a long time. And I think going back to what you said at the beginning, there was always this worry that that this film would like feel out of date, and like the cameras were always changing, the tech was always changing, but we really always had to like take a step back and realize that we're not journalists, that we're telling this longer story. And I mean, unfortunately, you're seeing in the headlines, and who knows what will be happening, you know, in a few weeks from now when the Chauvin decision is announced. And you know, sadly, these things are always relevant and continue to be relevant. And if you you look back at, they were relevant 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and before that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really, it took a lot of ideas that I've been working with for a while now, and just kind of continued in this way.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you know, you're mentioning that this film in at least some form was on your mind for maybe upwards of 6 years now. And yeah, I think anyone familiar with your other films would no doubt see a kind of thematic linkage, a progression of ideas, and, you know, specifically, yeah, how power, your interest in power in general, how it's wielded. But also, I think this film, Rat Film, they're both films about Baltimore, and how the city has become a testing ground for policy and tech. And I'm just generally curious about the many other elements that we see in the film, and you know, just when they sort of came into the fold, and just generally how like the passage of time over these years shaped the film. Like, for example, when did this focus group sequence come into play?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm always going down the rabbit hole with my research, and when I find these synchronous moments across different threads, that's always, I know that there's something there. And you know, with All Light Everywhere, I found this connection, you know, between the makers of the body camera Axon and the weapons, and in some totally unrelated at the time reading that I was doing. I was reading about early cinema, and, you know, how the photographic rifle was actually literally the first portable movie camera. And I was reading it in this book called A Tenth of a Second by Jimena Canales, which is this really incredible survey of a lot of these instruments and sort of mid-19th century visuality. So yeah, so I just found this really compelling link that, you know, here's this company that's making these guns and making these cameras, and this goes way, way back. And, you know, as all of these ideas were on the backdrop of, I think, like 2016 was this really pivotal shift. Facebook, at least on a very mainstream level, was going from this cool place where you hung out with your friends to actually this really nefarious presence in people's lives, and they were starting to really talk about that on a really large scale. And the term fake news was really hitting the mainstream, and I just started thinking a lot more about the frames that we use to you know, visualize our current events, and less about like the stories themselves. So I really got very interested in like the infrastructure of these images. And yeah, you know, I think that I heard about this company that was doing these focus groups using these tools, and I just was really interested in this idea of watching people as they watch, and how actually the act of looking becomes a productive site in itself, and it produces data which is then extracted from you, and you know, becomes valuable in another person's hands. So yeah, I just thought it was like this way of actually further implicating the audience, not just as a passive you know, consumer of the content, but actually as an active participant in the meaning of the film, and to further question their own position when they're yeah, viewing the film.
Yeah, this act of looking also comes into play with the sequence around like the eclipse too, right?
Yeah.
But I kind of want to talk about two sequences in the film sort of in conversation with each other, which is that of the Axon headquarters segment, the tour of the headquarters in Arizona, and then this segment with persistent surveillance systems at the Baltimore community meeting, because I think the differences in these sequences are quite stark. You know, obviously both parties involved in front of the camera are aware of the camera, but the effect is quite different. That we see Steve at Axon, he's super game to, you know, work with you, actually like follow a certain choreography around the space. You know, your freedom to move yourself is actually pretty clear, whereas in in this community meeting, it feels very enclosed and cloistered, and, you know, faces are blurred, and there's a tenseness of the meeting that is definitely, you know, just felt in the way it's filmed. And I'm curious, like, what ideas or expectations, you know, you brought to these particular segments of the film, and you know, what the circumstances were for your initial involvement, and then what it actually felt like, and like how things changed, you know, the day of the shoot.
Yeah, I mean, there was, I think really early on, I was treating all these different sections like a lab experiment, you know, where I was drawn to Axon, and we got our access there, and, you know, we planned everything out, and it felt very controlled, and we were moving, you know, from section to section through these very deliberate choreographed sequences. And, you know, with Axon, I think I have a way of working now where I try to be very upfront and like very explicit with the details of filming with the subject beforehand. We have extensive conversations. We do a lot of research into the environment, the location. With Axon in particular, we watched all of the corporate videos that they'd ever released and got used to that sort of visual language that they were comfortable in working with, and in designing our shoot mimicked that. The idea being that we're really interested in that performance that they bring, and you can see that in how comfortable Steve is. And yes, we were just moving through all these different sequences in the film, and I think our plan with the persistent surveillance solutions was that it would be another scene like that, where we had this kind of very closed environment, and we would come in with a shot list and get exactly what we needed. Originally, we were only supposed to film just with Ross, just in that dark room, him showing us the program. And kind of like off the cuff, Ross invited us to a community meeting, and we actually weren't even thinking of going at the time. It kind of felt like it was sort of outside the purview of what this film was. And it also kind of went against my instinct of like, I didn't know the people I was going to be filming. I don't like showing up unannounced. I'd like to really bring people in as much as possible to the act of filming. And this wasn't that. And, you know, I think that discomfort and that tension, you know, as soon as we got there, we really tried to speak to as many people and let us know what we were doing. But, you know, you have people coming in and out, and, you know, you see, you know, we're in a community space, specifically like a Black church, and, you know, we're white filmmakers with, you know, someone who's white with his own film crew, who's another white guy, and, you know, there's not really that sort of differentiation between the different gazes there, and things didn't go as planned. I think that anyone in that room did not foresee the conversation that unfolded. But I think that it is actually, I mean, the ideas expressed were so like passionate and articulate, and like just so grounded in like the other side of these kind of abstract technologies that I've been talking about for the rest of the film. You know, we really tried to focus on perpetrators, not victims, for this film. I didn't want to frame anyone as a victim, and we were more interested in these tools. And that scene wasn't people speaking as victims, but just as like really complex, fully fledged, unique people bringing their experiences with policing, with surveillance, with all of these different projects that get hawked to communities all the time. And, you know, it produced like this really complicated dynamic that you see on camera that directly implicated me. And you know, our film starts out with this blind spot, right? And I thought it was actually really important to just to include that, and not just to further cut myself out of the frame as another blind spot in the image. And you know, that night everything changed with the film, and I think we saw that you can't, like, films aren't lab experiments. There's chaos and complexity and outcomes that you can't control, and that actually, if you try to control everything, you end up with this like really cold, sterile, lifeless production, you know, that and so yeah, I think that was just part of our you know, remaining open to that and trying to be vulnerable and honest about that interaction, even if it did implicate us.
On this notion of you know, following your instinct, then I want to go to the end of the film. You know, in the end, you leave us with this footage of the Frederick Douglass High School students like working in their production class, you know, playing with this technology that, you know, like we just sort of thought about in a very unique way for the hour and a half or so preceding it. And then, and, you know, you mentioned that this was at one point the core of the film. And I'm just curious if you can elaborate more on, you know, what it was that ultimately pointed you away from using the footage in the way you initially conceived.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I think it was a series of a lot of different conversations and spanning years, and you know, so yeah, like where to even begin it? We spent so much time, you know, in that classroom, you know, with the students and with Dr. Pat and Miss Young and just everyone else in that classroom, and you know, we were making this thing together, and it was supposed to be in this film about technology and vision and power, and the kids were always occupied this place of life and like resistance and like just this space of possibility within the film. And they were that, and they did, you know, and we made some amazing things together. And when we got to the end of the film, we realized that you had a film that was telling one very particular, specific narrative of the violence of image making. That's not like the only history there is, but there is a thread of violence and image making that is very real. And this film was trying to unsettle that, deflate it, and leave space for other possible outcomes. And we got to like this final cut, you know, and the kids were in there. We didn't know how to do it. It felt like, just through the nature of editing, like you have, I mean, it's like cinema theory, like 101, like you just have image A and you have image B, you know, you have this image of a guy pointing a gun, and you have image B, right, of a kid holding a camera, and it always felt like they were the targets of that. And, you know, it's a classroom, you know, less than a mile from where Freddie Gray was killed, you know, and that high school, for, you know, Frederick Douglass High, was the real epicenter of the unrest. And so they're no stranger to that, right? And, you know, if we're being explicit about it, like, to be like young and Black in this country is to be a target, you know, by police. But I began to question my own role as reasserting that framing of these kids as targets, when they're just like a bunch of high school kids having fun with cameras, imagining lives for themselves that didn't necessarily fit into my framework that I had been shoehorning them into. So yeah, we reached this really, it was a really difficult decision. And, you know, we decided that in the end, whatever we had made together was this incredible process, these incredible images. They made their own film with the footage, you know, it's like, it's out there. And like it was always important that whatever we did together existed independent of the film, that they weren't working for me, that we were providing resources and whatever help we could to help them make their film. So in the end, we realized that they were making their own film that didn't belong in this film. And, you know, I think that the thing that I feel good about is that, like, I think that in the end, like, we did have like a great experience together. And I think that, like, I like the idea of a film that can produce these relationships that exist outside of just existing for the sake of the film. That there's a film can be a platform for other things to happen, and you don't have to jam it all in as evidence of all the things you did. You know, we don't have to. A film doesn't have to necessarily be a political act. The politics can take place outside of it. The direct action can take place out of it. And so, yeah, it was a long process. And you know, I think we tried to be honest to that. It's the same thing, you know, with a community meeting, where it's like in the end, we just tried to be honest to the process and not try to like turn it into something that it wasn't. You know, we just said very explicitly what happened, and yeah.
It also goes back to that idea you mentioned just earlier about you know, you avoid, you know, pulling sequences of really violent body cam footage because, you know, perhaps ultimately this film is not necessarily about this explicit violence, but actually the violence and, you know, the systems of power that are actually happening around it, what is actually like allowing this tool to even be used to capture this footage in the first place, this more latent, less obvious kind of violence.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm glad you bring that up. I think that maybe more interesting than like what we did show in this film is like what we didn't show, or like what we perceive the limits of visualization to be within this film. And I think that, you know, one of our very first rules we made was that there was going to be no body camera footage in this. There was going to be no violence there's going to be no explicit on-screen images of violence in this film, you know, because we are so trained as audiences to see that and to be numbed by that. I as a filmmaker, especially as like, you know, a white filmmaker making films about policing and racial injustice, or has these elements in it, not only about that. I don't see any need, not any need, but I oftentimes doubt the use of re-traumatizing your audience for the sake of making a point. And then I think that it's like almost like if you blot out the brightest thing in the room, you actually get to see all these more subtle shades of nuance and actually maybe see how we got to that point to begin with. So yeah, that was kind of I mean, the same thing with the sun, right? It's like you have this moment where the sun is eclipsed and all these other shades come out. And that was always something that we were using as a sort of aspirational model in our approach.
Yeah, there are a lot of useful metaphors throughout this film for sure. I kind of want to, I only have maybe, I guess, one more question to ask, which sort of goes back to the film's connection to, you know, your previous films, because I think this one shares a few of the same collaborators, particularly with Dan Deacon scoring the music, and even Corey Hughes as your cinematographer. You know, both, you know, Baltimore-based artists in their own right. Would you mind talking a little bit about your working relationships with these guys, and, you know, how it's evolved over the years, and, you know, what makes this particular cohort work so well? Maybe we can start, you know, with Dan.
Yeah. I'll just add a couple names. I also returned to work with production company Memory, which is Riel Rockdector and Sebastian Pardo, who also have another film, El Planeta. Amalia Ullman, they produced that, so it's so cool to see their work also recognized in that way. It's an amazing film. And also Jonna McCone, who's the other producer on this film, and is like an incredibly talented photographer, radio producer, filmmaker, artist in her own right. And she came on like a year or two into the project and just like really transformed, you know, it just really brought it to the next level. And so it's really just it's like 6 people made this whole film, really. And, you know, we had a lot of help from the outside, but that's like the core group right there. And, you know, I think I'm just like a big advocate of just working with people that you really love and trust. And like, I think that comes with its own complications, but if you really believe in the project, and, you know, you just take on these really fluid roles, and you can just do so much. And yeah, I think every project that we do, we learn so much from. Corey, I worked with on Subject to Review. We actually filmed this at the same time. I started this film like almost 5 years ago, and Subject to Review, we like took a year break basically and worked on that. So I almost joked that like the Subject to Review could be like an extended scene in this film. Yeah, Dan, like I work with, we worked together on all of my films so far, and we just have like a really beautiful, trusting relationship where, I'm not a musician, and he just really lets me in on the process, and just, he trusts me to, like, he gives me his stems. So he makes these, like, he'll make a track, and he'll like give me like a 10-layer stem, and to like his masters, and he like trusts me, a non-musician, to go in and like get the timing right, and then that'll generate a new idea. And it's just, I don't know, it's just built on trust and love and respect. And yeah, I mean, Riel and Sebastian, like we all just really know why we're there, and we don't we have our own frustrations with the conventional ways of getting there, and we understand that like the types of films that we want to make are going to be harder, because a lot of those familiar like support structures, or those familiar ways of doing things, just like don't really exist for what we want to do. And so we're just always figuring out a new way to do it. And we've just found a really cool group of people who all believe in that and are along for the ride. So yeah, I like my team a lot. It's truly, I'm up here talking, but it's like, this is all of us right here. It's not just my voice speaking. Like this is truly all of our film, and they're responsible for it just as much as I am.
Sure. I think that's a nice note to end this on. Congratulations to you all, and the film is incredible. Thank you again, Theo, and thanks for the conversation.
Thank you, Tyler. I'm really, really happy to have you here.